My grandmother told me, not from a book, not from a register. She told me from memory, from kitchens and stoops, from farms and compounds, from watching dogs move through dust and heat and work. She said the dog did not arrive whole. It was made step by step, crossing borders that had no names yet.
Southern Africans saw it, Central Africans saw it. They did not argue about breeds. They spoke about dogs that worked, dogs that held, dogs that held.
Knowledge passed by word of mouth, by eye, by lived experience.
Long before DNA had language for it.
This dog belongs to us, but it was never meant to be kept small.
Borrowed by the world, misremembered, rewritten, but never erased.
My grandmother told me. My grandmother told me.
So welcome to episode 2 of the Bull Terrier's influence in the Rhodesian Ridgeback. This podcast is based on my book, The Influence of the Bull Terrier in the Rhodesian Ridgeback, which is part of the Thoughts on the Rhodesian Ridgeback series. It's available from Amazon as an ebook or as a paperback. If you have any thoughts relating to the podcast and would like to leave a comment, please do leave it in the comments below. And please do press the like button if you've enjoyed the podcast. And please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. In this section, I would like to dig a little into the historical mention of the possible presence of the Bull Terrier in early settler communities in southern and central Africa in relation to the formation of the Ridgeback, and also to look at what little DNA evidence is available. I will begin by focusing on an academic article by Parker et al. 2017, which discusses genetic clustering or phylogenetic analysis of dog breeds, including technical language from population genetics and evolutionary biology. So let's unpack it clearly, as it is integral to understanding the relationship between the Rhodesian Ridgeback and the Bull Terrier in southern and central Africa. So in this section, I want to briefly explore two things. First, the historical suggestions that Bull Terriers may have been present in early settler communities in southern and central Africa during the formation of the Ridgeback. And secondly, what modern DNA evidence tells us about the Bull Terrier's genetic identity. Now, the genetic study I'm referring to comes from Parker and colleagues 2017. It was kindly shared with me by Dr. Christina Wistrom of Africa Rhodesian Ridgebacks in California. So let's simplify what the science actually did. Researchers compared the DNA of 161 dog breeds. They measured how genetically similar each breed is to every other breed, then built a genetic family tree called a cladogram, showing which breeds cluster together. To test reliability, they repeated the analysis 100 times. This is called bootstrapping. If a breed clusters the same way every time, that grouping is considered statistically strong. So out of 161 breeds, 146 formed clean, distinct genetic clusters. These breeds are clearly defined and consistently separate from others. 15 breeds did not form completely separate clusters. Instead, they grouped closely with very near relatives. One of those breeds was the Bull Terrier, along with the miniature Bull Terrier. So, what does this mean for the Bull Terrier? Well, the Bull Terrier and miniature Bull Terrier consistently cluster together with extremely strong statistical support of 98% or higher. In plain terms, they are genetically almost the same population. They share very recent common ancestry. The miniature is essentially a size variant, not a separate genetic line. This makes sense historically. The Bull Terrier was developed in 19th century England from Bulldog and Terrier crosses, then refined through selective breeding. The miniature was later bred down in size, not created from a different foundation. So genetically, they form one tight modern cluster. This matters when we look at the possible presence of Bull Terriers in early southern Africa. We're not talking about an ancient land race with blurred origins. We're talking about a distinctly Victorian breed with a clear, traceable genetic identity, one that still carries the signature of its Bulldog Terrier foundation, and that signature is detectable in modern DNA studies. Before I move on, just a quick note for viewers. I've started grouping the episodes that deal specifically with the Bull Terrier influence in the Rhodesian Ridgeback into a single playlist on my channel page, and I'll be doing the same for other focus themes as the material grows. But remember that this channel is based on material that I've already written up, and I'll be doing the same for shorts. The idea is to organize the channel as a working library so that if you're researching a particular topic, you can follow it in one place rather than searching through individual uploads. And I hope that this makes things a lot easier for people to access. All right then, so to get back to this podcast, I'll continue to talk about the Bull Terrier's DNA. The Bull Terrier's background helps explain why this pattern appears. The breed was created in 19th century England from crosses of bulldogs and terriers, notably the Old English White Terrier and the now extinct Bull and Terrier types. Later, selective breeding introduced Dalmatian and possibly Pointer blood to refine the head shape and add stamina. The miniature Bull Terrier was developed much later as a size variant, not as a distinct genetic line. So genetically, it's no surprise that both the standard and miniature Bull Terriers are nearly identical in DNA structure and cluster tightly together, while still retaining traces of their Bulldog and Terrier heritage. This is why they do not appear as isolated genetically unique nodes, like more ancient breeds such as the Basenji and Saluki, but rather as part of a recently derived Terrier-Bulldog cluster. But I'm interested in genetic relationships and breed history, particularly how the Bull Terrier and its lineage connects to the Rhodesian Ridgeback, and what the DNA tree tells us about that. Now, the two forms of the Bull Terrier cluster tightly together, showing they're basically one breed, derived from the same genetic source. They also sit within a larger branch of Bull and Terrier type breeds. This whole group shares ancestry from 19th century England, when bulldogs and various terriers were crossed to produce fighting and later show breeds. So genetically, the Bull Terrier represents a modern, hybrid British breed, not an ancient line, but a deliberately engineered one. The Rhodesian Ridgeback is genetically quite different, but not unrelated. in the broad domestic dog family tree. Genetic studies, for example, Parker et al. 2017, Shannon et al. 2015, show that the Ridgeback clusters in a southern African group. Now, this group is related to hounds and hunting breeds, especially the Great Dane, Greyhound, and Mastiff type dogs, with additional influence from Khoisan or indigenous dogs. The Ridgeback's genetic line reflects European hunting and Mastiff blood, mixed with local African dogs, selected in the 19th century in southern Africa. So we know that many different breeds of dogs went into the development of the Rhodesian Ridgeback. For instance, the Greyhound gave the Ridgeback its speed, endurance, a lot of its hunting ability, and we can see various aspects of the Greyhound morphology in the Rhodesian Ridgeback. Some have very elegant necks, for instance. But we also see dogs such as the Great Dane coming in with the size and the bone. And also, again, aspects of its morphology coming through, as well as its sense of humor. And again, we can talk about the Mastiff. The Mastiff gave the dog its substance, its bone, part of the dog's skull conformation. But this can be said for each and every one of the dogs that went into the Rhodesian Ridgeback. We just see this play of traits coming through particular dogs, and we can pick them up. The little African dog, the light little African dog, a lot of indigenous African dogs have the look of the greyhound about them. Even the pariah dogs tend to have something of the greyhound type. Let me rather put that in them. And also these little indigenous dogs' hunting propensity come through very, very strongly. So we see this coming through even in our modern breed, because our breed is not very old. So both the Bull Terrier and Ridgeback have some shared European genetic ancestry, but they branch off in different directions. The cladogram shows us that the Bull Terrier belongs to the Bull and Terrier family from English fighting and companion breeds, while the Ridgeback belongs to a Mastiff Hound family adapted in Africa for endurance, hunting, and the climatic conditions. But historically, the Bull Terrier did play a role in shaping the modern Rhodesian Ridgeback, not necessarily as a dominant ancestor. It contributed certain features through colonial era breeding in southern Africa, when settlers crossed imported British breeds with local dogs. Of what a Ridgeback with Bull Terrier blood bred into it might look like. So this is what AI has thrown out, what AI has generated. And I suppose one of the principal features is that the dog becomes more substantial. It the skull, the dimensions of the skull change somewhat, becomes wider and more robust. The body becomes more robust as well, more substantial. So that's quite interesting. In historical and genetic terms, early southern African dogs included pointers, mastiffs, bulldogs, greyhounds, and occasionally bull terriers. These were bred with Khoisan and other African hunting dogs or village dogs to create adaptable, strong, and heat-tolerant dogs or progeny. The Ridgeback inherited its muscular frame, courage, and some head structure partly from bull-type dogs, probably including early bull terriers or similar dogs. But its ridge and at least part of its coat genetics come from African dogs. In addition to the later genetic contributions, and although modern DNA trees place the Ridgeback some distance from the Bull Terrier, the shared European Bulldog ancestry means they share some genetic traces, though distant. But we'll talk about this again. And here's a table of what we've discussed so far. In summary, the Bull Terrier and Miniature Bull Terrier are modern English breeds, almost genetically identical, originating from Bulldog and Terrier crosses. The Ridgeback is a Southern African hybrid, part Hound and Mastiff, and part Indigenous African dog. They're not necessarily close relatives genetically, but they share deep ancestry through the old European Bulldog and Mastiff lines that spread through colonial breeding. Historically, Bull Terriers or similar dogs likely contributed strength, courage, and jaw structure to early Ridgeback stock. Genetically today, the Ridgeback's DNA places it closer to Mastiffs and Hounds than to Bull and Terrier breeds. Now, talking from a purely genetic standpoint and looking at the three significant papers on modern DNA studies, which is Parker et al. 2004 or 2017 in Science, Cell Reports, Shannon et al. 2015, Cell Reports, Dean Coe et al. 2018. Now, they have mapped the relationships, the genetic relationships, among hundreds of dog breeds. And in all these data sets, the Rhodesian Ridgeback falls firmly within the Sighthound, Mastiff, and Hunting group, along with breeds like the Great Dane, the Mastiff, and the Greyhound, while the Bull Terrier clusters with the Bull and Terrier group, alongside Staffordshire Bull Terrier, Bulldog, and related breeds. Now, these clusters are genetically distinct, and none of these papers have so far measured or shown a measurable gene flow between the Bull Terrier and Ridgeback populations. In other words, there isn't a strong gene flow between the Bull Terrier and Ridgeback populations. And as a result, there's no genetic evidence currently confirming Bull Terrier ancestry in Rhodesian Ridgeback. However, the Parker diagram does show multiple areas of close genetic affinity between Rhodesian Ridgebacks and Bull and Terrier type dogs. And it's a pattern which is consistent with historical accounts of limited one-directional incorporation into early Ridgeback breeding. So taking a much closer look at Parker's cladogram, we see that it's a neighbor-joining cladogram, a branching tree that groups breeds by genetic similarity, not by appearance or function. The closer two breeds are on the same branch, the more recent their common ancestry. Colors represent genetic clusters or breed families such as terriers, herding dogs, mastiffs, Asian Spits, hounds, etc. And you'd have to go back to the earlier diagram, which shows the complete diagram, to see that the yellow dots and stars indicate bootstrap support values, which is a measure of how statistically confident the researchers are in that branch's placement. For instance, 90 to 100% is really very strong. Now, moving just below the Bulldog and Terrier mix cluster, you will find another magenta cluster of Great Dane and Rhodesian Ridgeback. And if you follow the connective lines through, you will see that they feed out of the Bulldog and Terrier cluster, including the Bull Terrier. And this is very significant, genetically speaking. So what we've seen in this section of the diagram that I've isolated is that the Ridgeback clade emerges from the broader Bull Mastiff Terrier radiation. Now, the inner circle shows older ancestry, with the branches outward radiating outward show a later differentiation. And so what it means genetically is that Ridgebacks, Great Danes, Bull Bulls, and Cane Corsos sit within the greater European Molosser or Bull type radiation, which in itself includes Bulldogs, Terriers, Mastiffs, and Fighting Dogs. They're not separate inventions, they're divergent expressions of the same foundational stock. Now, here we see two things that can be true at once. The Ridgeback ancestry passes through the Bull Mastiff Terrier complex. But the Ridgebacks are also shown not to be very closely related to modern Bull Terriers in any significant way. So the tree is showing shared ancestral substrate, but not recent kinship. Now, to be precise about the Bull Terrier, modern Bull Terriers sit on a very short, tight twig, deep inside the blue Bulldog Terrier cluster, and they reflect late Victorian selective exaggeration. Now, that twig is much later than the branch point where Ridgebacks peel off towards the Great Dane Mastiff forms. So genetically, the Bull Terrier is not necessarily a strong candidate for the progenitor of the Rhodesian Ridgeback. This doesn't mean that they could not have been crossing, it just means they're not hugely significant as a progenitor. Nevertheless, both descend from overlapping Molosser bull stock. So, really, it would be incorrect to say that the Bull Terrier and Rhodesian Ridgeback are not related. That's not correct. What we can say is that the Rhodesian Ridgeback emerged from the broader European Bull Mastiff genetic radiation, sharing deep ancestry with Bulldog and Bull and Terrier types, but diverging prior to the intense bottlenecking that produced the modern Bull Terrier. So then, what the diagram actually shows us, it shows the temporal depth of divergence and the difference between ancestral proximity and breed level closeness. Now, this supports a very interesting argument. It suggests that Ridgebacks preserve an earlier, less distorted version of Bull Mastiff genetics. Bull Terriers represent a late aesthetic extreme. The African context arrests exaggeration rather than creating it, or at least it did before the Rhodesian Ridgeback became a show dog. In other words, Ridgebacks are not strongly descended from Bull Terriers, but they are parallel survivals from the same genetic well, filtered through radically different selection pressures. However, this does not rule out historical admixture or crossbreeding. It only means that such mixing didn't dominate the Ridgeback's genome enough to show up as a primary signal in the SNP data. In other words, the Ridgeback's genetic signature today looks more like ancient hounds, African and Asian hounds, than terriers, but this doesn't mean that Bull Terrier blood was never introduced. Now, the historical records as late as 1800s to early 1900s suggest early lion dogs and Van Rooyen's dogs in southern Africa were bred from mixed European stock, often described as including bulldog and bull terrier for courage and tenacity. These influences likely contributed behavioral and morphological traits, such as temperament, strength, head shape, even if they are now genetically diluted. The Parker genomic data thus reflects the modern, stabilized Ridgeback breed, long after selective breeding standardized it. So the early Bull Terrier import has become part of its distant ancestry, not a current genetic neighbor. Although oral history and written text does point to later isolated introductions. And here, in tabulated form, is a summary of what we've just discussed. The Ridgeback's genome contains segments of shared ancestry or introgression from Bull Terrier type dogs. It's like a faint but visible family tie that's still traceable even after a century of selective breeding. This branch visually confirms what colonial era breeding records, mission diaries, and kennel histories have always implied: that early lion dogs on South African farms were mixed from European settlers' bull breeds, often bull terrier, bulldog, and mastiff, and local hunting dogs. The bull terrier's toughness, head shape, and temperament were valued for hunting and guarding in rough bush conditions. By the time the Ridgeback standard was formalized in the 1920s, the breed had stabilized, but the genetic footprint of those early bull breeds remained embedded in its DNA. The bull terrier is a source. Now, to refer back to the cladogram, the branching position of the Ridgeback leans towards the bull terrier mastiff cluster, or the blue section. The Ridgeback's cluster is not a pure hound cluster. It shows shared ancestry with the bull type group. The Ridgeback forms part of a transitional clade between hounds and bull types, exactly what would be expected from its historical mixed origins. So, put simply, the chart shows that the Ridgeback DNA carries enough bull terrier heritage to leave a visible link in modern genetic trees. This confirms that bull terrier type dogs were real contributors to the Ridgeback's development, not just folklore. So yes, that interpretation is scientifically possible, and it fits both what the genetic tree can show and what is known from historical breeding on the southern African frontier. So referring to the cladogram again, when two modern breeds sit on connected or neighboring branches, the simplest explanation is that they share ancestry. That ancestry can come from either a common older source population, for example, the 18th and 19th century bull and terrier dogs from Britain, or, and direct introgression, people in South Africa intentionally crossing bull-type dogs into the local hunting stock that later became the Rhodesian Ridgeback. Either way, the signal you see today means the Bull Terrier lineage and the Ridgeback lineage intersected genetically at some point or points. Now, looking at the 19th century context that supports this, written records from farms, military posts, and early hunters mention dogs brought from Britain described as bulldogs or bull terriers. They were valued for courage and grip when hunting large game, guarding wagons and farms, crossbreeding with local hounds or Khoisan and colonial dogs to make hardier hunting types. When Cornelius van Rooyen and others stabilized their lion dog strain in what is now Zimbabwe and South Africa, such bull and terrier blood was almost certainly present. These animals were the ancestors of today's registered Rhodesian Ridgeback. So, considering 20th and 21st century genetics, the genomic tree you're looking at from Parker et al. Is based on modern DNA samples. It shows that the Ridgeback pulls slightly toward the Bull Terrier Mastiff cluster rather than grouping purely with hounds. That can only happen if the Ridgeback genome retains fragments or tiny percentages of shared DNA with bull-type ancestors. So the reading is consistent with the data. A Bull Terrier type ancestor contributed to the Ridgeback gene pool long ago. And if we are to believe oral history, more recently as well. Because both breeds were formalized after that mixing, their modern descendants diverged for a century under closed stud breeding. Yet they still share that ancient contributor. So, yes, modern Ridgebacks and modern Bull Terriers likely trace part of their lineage back to the same historical Bull Terrier type dogs that were present in southern Africa during the colonial period. The cladogram alone can't tell how much Bull Terrier DNA remains, or whether the link comes from shared British ancestors versus local crosses. To prove the degree of introgression, one would need haplotype or admixture analysis, methods that estimate what proportion of Bull Terrier-like segments still exist in Ridgeback genomes. But the tree does confirm that a connection is there. So my interpretation that today's Rhodesian Ridgebacks descend in part from an early Bull Terrier ancestor bred in South Africa is indeed plausible and supported by both history and genetics. Now, to move on to historical references linking the Bull Terrier to the Rhodesian Ridgeback. Where do they come from? We know that the Bull Terrier contributed towards the Ridgeback, but where is it indicated in documents or reports? So there are clues and direct information that come largely from informal publications, breed histories, kennel club publications, and breeder sources, as well as historical documents. Just a word about nomenclature. It is crucial to note that the word that appears in many of the secondary sources referred to in this podcast are not necessarily the modern registered Bull Terrier breed, as described by John Coles in the 19th Century Standard. Instead, historical writers used a range of terms loosely, such as bull and terrier. And this is a working cross type dog, bulldog bred to local terriers, which were common in Britain in the 18th to 19th centuries. They were used for ratting, for bull baiting, and for farm work. They're not the same as the later bull terrier that we see in the show ring. And just to give you a sense of the historical context of these dogs, here's a little video. I fed some images that I had of indigenous African dogs and asked AI to produce a typical Stone Age dog that would have been owned by the Khoi people. And so it accurately produced this little dog, which is a type of dog that would have been used in the creation at the very beginning of the development of the Rhodesian Ridgeback. Alternatively, Bull Terrier, in many 19th century texts, and this is all in lowercase, simply meant a bull-type dog with terrier attributes. Just as the bullenbeter in Dutch and Afrikaans folk terms was used in early Cape records to describe bull-biting dogs, again, it became a generic term. So if we look at specific breeds versus working types, we see that the modern bull terrier, or the standard bull terrier, was being developed in England in the early to mid 19th century from various bulldog and terrier crosses, and that it was not a fully modern standardized export item until later. So early references to bull terrier in colonial contexts may most likely refer to the working type rather than to pedigreed imports. The result was that many breeder histories that say bull terrier are most likely referring to bull-type working dogs, which may have resembled earlier bull terriers, rather than a documented shipment of pedigreed bull terriers. So many Ridgeback histories, say from breed clubs or breeders, for instance, list bulldog, pointer, Great Dane, greyhound, and various terriers among the European breeds used in early crossbreeding. Some of these say bulldogs and bull terriers. This mixing up of nomenclature is often both inaccurate and confusing, but I mention this so that viewers, readers, and researchers are clear that the historical writing must be interpreted rather than as taken verbatim. So now I'd like to move on to the very foundation of the Rhodesian Ridgeback breed at the Cape of Good Hope in the 17th and 18th centuries, and move through the 19th and into the 20th century, which would include both Dutch and British rule. Let's say from the years 1652 all the way through to 1910, when the Republic of South Africa was then formed. So most of the references relating to the formation of the breed during this period are really from secondary or third or more sources. But they are important in that they do represent the overriding perception among breeders and writers or bloggers on the foundational creation of the breed. A more detailed and academically referenced description and analysis of the early foundation of the breed can be found in my book, Dogs of Africa. I've also written academic articles on the topic, as well as magazine articles. Nevertheless, the perception of the origin of the breed and the inclusion of the Bull Terrier and Bull-type dogs is outlined in numerous amateur fancier references on the topic. On one particular kennel page, Bloodhound and Pointer are referenced as being good for scenting, while Bulldog and Bull Terrier are referenced for courage and tenacity. Now, this would be fairly accurate, if not comprehensive, regarding early contributors to the breed. On another kennel page, in the history of the breed section, Bulldog and some Terriers are cited among the European dogs crossed with indigenous Khoi dogs. This is true, but it's also very ambiguous, clearly indicating that these references were taken from an unknown primary source. On the web pages of the Rhodesian Ridgeback International Federation in the origins of the breed, it lists Bulldog among the principal breeds used along with Pointers, Greyhounds, Terriers, etc. Now, the common assumption is correct that the courage and tenacity traits in Ridgebacks came partly from Bull-type or Terrier-type dogs, including something like Bulls or Bull Terriers. In fact, my own research has strongly suggested this, and this is something that we will cover in following podcasts in this series. So what do we know so far? We know from historical writing and independent research, including my own books and articles, that Ridgeback-type dogs and the ancestors of the Rhodesian Ridgeback in southern Africa were created by settlers from many imported European breeds crossed with indigenous African dogs. This is something that was initiated already in the 16th century and continued even into the first half of the 20th century. Written and oral histories from the 19th and early 20th centuries mention these European inputs, with the following breeds being mentioned most often: Bulldogs for strength and courage, Greyhounds for speed, Pointers for scenting ability, Terriers for toughness and ratting ability, Great Danes and Mastiffs for size, and local African dogs for heat resistance and the ridge trait. And we'll just take a little break here, as I've created a couple of short little videos of what your typical African village dog would look like. And this is quite an accurate depiction of dogs in certain areas of southern Africa. It's the type of dog that would have been used in the creation of the Rhodesian Ridgeback. They're small and light, they're agile, they take very little to keep, and they are exceptionally brave and loyal. And they've been on the southern African subcontinent for some 2,000 years. Anyway, to get back to our thread. However, as already pointed out, the word terrier in these sources doesn't always mean bull terrier specifically. It could refer to any British Terrier type brought by settlers. The Bull Terrier did exist in South Africa by the mid to late 1800s in British garrisons, traders' stations, the companions of miners, and farmers kept them. So it's known through oral history and community folklore that some were used in local crosses, but no documented breeding records prove this. Or are there such documents? Well, fortunately, there are. They do exist. There are written records that directly or indirectly reference Bull Terrier influence in local dog populations. Now, specifically looking at the 19th century, personal family reminiscences, community oral history, historical diaries, photographs and paintings, and other writings tell us that Bull Terriers were a favorite of English colonists in Africa and India. Bull Terrier contributions in the 19th century would have been indirect through occasional crosses between settlers' bull terriers and local hunting dogs before the breed was standardized. And it would have been relatively minor compared with a much larger influence from bulldogs, pointers, and hounds. Thus, its impact would have been more about temperament, courage, tenacity, than about genetic lineage, visible in modern DNA trees. And this contribution is borne out in two books, which I happened upon and which we will be discussing in later podcasts in the series. But first, let's look more specifically at the 19th century references. Now, referencing David Hancock in his interesting online article entitled Lion Hunting Hounds, he uses both primary and secondary sources while writing this article. He has also used my writings quite extensively in the article, but unfortunately has not referenced me. I would just like to take this opportunity to ask people using my work to please reference me, as I have noted how my work has been used on many occasions without any reference to myself. Anyway, to continue, Hancock writes, accounts of dogs owned by early Boer farmers embrace breeds such as bloodhounds, including an African variation. My writing, which would be the Xhosa Ibaku. He goes on, greyhounds, bulldogs, mastiffs, foxhounds, pointers, bull terriers, and Airedales. Hancock refers to bull terriers several times in his article. Hancock reiterates what I write in my own books and articles, that early Boers, settlers, and colonists would have required formidable dogs to contend with the African environment. He cites the hunter-writer William Baldwin. He goes on to write, the hunter-writer William Baldwin, in his African Hunting from 1852 to 1860, of 1877, described the hunting dogs he preferred, bull and greyhound with a dash of the pointer, the best breed possible. A later book of his was illustrated with a drawing of a ridged European dog. And here I've created what I imagine a greyhound, bulldog, and pointer would have looked like in the African environment. It would have been a large, tough, agile, and tenacious dog. Inspired by Baldwin's book, a hunter called Frederick Courtney Selous traveled extensively until the 1890s, covering most of southern Africa. Later, he hunted with Van Rooyen, accounts of their dogs mentioning again and again rough-haired greyhounds, pointers, prized not only for their noses but for the robustness of their feet, and mongrels between these breeds and local dogs. Interestingly, Hancock refers to the Bulawayo Chronicle, which makes reference to breeds of dogs in the area during the period. Numbers of breeds during the period 1894 to 1917 include Pointer, 87, Bull Terrier, 25, Greyhound, 20, Bulldog, 19, Airedale, 15, Great Dane, 14, Boarhound, 11, and Deerhound, 10. Now, the source of this was David Helgeson, 1982. Also mentioned were a Cuban Mastiff, a Kangaroo Hound, and a Ridgeback. It is significant that a distinction is made here between the Bulldog and Bull Terrier so that there can be no confusion. Much oral tradition and reader writings conflate and confuse the two types because they use secondary sources, not primary, and this then filters into incorrect oral tradition among breed fanciers. Most rely on the concept of the bulldog and general term of terrier as a contributing source. So, in his online resource article entitled Archive Rhodesian Ridgeback / Pioneer Farmers, Hancock goes on to write that accounts of dogs owned by early Boer farmers include breeds such as bloodhounds, including an African variation, greyhounds, bulldogs, mastiffs, foxhounds, pointers, bull terriers, and Airedales. This article also notes that military posts along the frontier kept dogs including bloodhounds, staghounds, greyhounds, bulldogs, terriers, mastiffs, pointers, and sometimes foxhounds. So this material explicitly mentions bull terriers among the breeds associated with early farmers, directly supporting the claim that bull-type terriers were present in early colonial contexts. However, to keep in mind, this archive is a modern online synthesis of older sources. Unfortunately, often without page numbers or direct archival citations. The accounts referenced are secondary summaries, meaning the material supports the argument, but does not conclusively establish the earliest presence through primary documentation in every case. Now, referring specifically to the late 19th century, David Hancock, in his Hancock on Dogs blogs, cites an entry in the South African Kennel Gazette, dated March 1909. He refers to a writer, inverted commas, who recalls seeing in 1860 a fine strain of dogs associated with military posts, noting that at each post could be found bulldogs, terriers, mastiffs, pointers, and related types. The report also refers to a crossbreed between the mastiff and the bulldog. In other words, it seems as if the old Bullenbaiter was also a strong favorite throughout the European settlement of the southern subcontinent, and this trend continues even today into the popularity of the modern boerboel, most especially among the Afrikaans-speaking white population of South Africa. This provides a contemporary recollection describing dogs present on farms or frontier posts during the 1860s, including bulldog and bull-type dogs, situating such animals firmly in mid-19th century South African contexts. And so there are a number of written records and summaries that support the idea that bull terrier type dogs, or bulldogs and terriers, came from Britain and were present among early farmers, military posts, etc., in southern Africa in the 19th century. David Hancock, in his article Dogs and Dogma, and even Major Hawley, as well as Club History's present documentary and oral material showing bull and terrier dogs were common among farmers, hunters, and at frontier posts. These corroborate the Percy Fitzpatrick testimony, the famous author of Jock of the Bushveld. This is in addition to the sources that I have uncovered and which I will present in a later podcast in the series. The famous South African book, Jock of the Bushveld, is a story set in 1880s, but published in 1907. It provides strong primary evidence for bull-type dogs in the veld. For those who don't know, the celebrated South African book, written by James Percy Fitzpatrick, features a dog named Jock. It is a South African literary classic. Jock is traditionally portrayed as a Staffordshire Terrier in South Africa. But secondary authors and some breed historians argue that Jock was a Bull Terrier. Certain historical revisionists, such as in Bull Terriers of South Africa, 1860 to 1999, by Colin Bowler, also argue that Jock was a Bull Terrier rather than a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. And this is referred to in an article in the Mail and Guardian newspaper. The film of the book also depicts Jock as a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. Now, referring to the article in the Mail and Guardian entitled Jock was a Bull Terrier by Paul Kirk, dated 26 January 2001. Now, this newspaper article debates whether Jock was a Bull Terrier or a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and it cites contemporary descriptions and breeder opinions. But Sir Percy Fitzpatrick's Jock of the Bushveld, stories set in the 1880s, published in 1907, describes Jock's dam as a Bull Terrier and the dog as a Bull and Terrier type. This is the most often cited piece of evidence for a Bull Terrier type dog in South Africa in the late 19th century. Fitzpatrick describes Jock's dam as, and I quote, "She was a Bull Terrier with a dull brindled coat, black and grey and shadowy stripes." At the very least, we know from this quote that pure Bull Terrier dogs were present in and used in the African veld. There is our proof. It is beautiful to have this 1880s camp memoir, giving a direct contemporary description of a Bull Terrier type dog in the Transvaal bushveld. There do exist less formal general statements that Bull Terriers were imported from England to South Africa at the turn of the 20th century, and so the case for the presence of Bull Terrier dogs being present in the 1800s, and at the very least extending into the early 20th century, is strong. Kennel and breeder narratives, sometimes as first or secondary sources, often repeat that early stock included Bulldog, Terrier, and Greyhound types. A founding show held in 1922 in Bulawayo, southern Rhodesia, included dogs, and I quote, "from undersized Great Dane to a small Bull Terrier." Now, this phrase appears in many secondary sources and is likely derived from a 1950 SAKU Gazette recollection, South African Kennel Union Gazette recollection, by B.W. Durham as the author. Now, Durham witnessed the show and wrote about it later. F.R. Barnes, originally from Fig Tree, but then residing in Bulawayo in 1922, in that same year, circularized the large circle of Ridgeback or Lion dog owners, asking that they bring their dogs to the meeting to be held on the second day of the Bulawayo Kennel Club show. It appears that the 1922 Ridgeback show did not formally form part of the larger show, but was a special meeting and exhibition to establish a standard for what would later become the Rhodesian Ridgeback. Its objective was to formulate a standard for later recognition by the South African Kennel Union. A large number of owners attended with their dogs. Over 20 dogs were brought to be shown. Durham was invited to attend. He noted that they were of all shapes and sizes, from the height of an undersized Great Dane to a small Bull Terrier, the same dogs that went into the creation of the breed. All colors were represented, with brindles and reds predominating. Now, I've included these two illustrations of a Ridgeback, early Ridgeback type dog with brindle coloration. And it just strikes me again how remarkable and striking the brindle coloration is on the Ridgeback, and actually how natural it seems to be within the breed. It's such a shame that we lost it. It is stated that Barnes drafted the first breed standard at the exhibition, modeling it after the Dalmatian standard, but with some modifications for the ridge and color. This document then became the basis for the Rhodesian Ridgeback standard, which was accepted by the South African Kennel Union in 1926. From the 1930s to the 1960s, bull terriers were present at dog show meetings in southern Africa. The earliest solid documentary evidence for the bull terrier in SA, such as registration papers, is only evident in the mid-20th century. For instance, Kusa documents an imported miniature bull terrier in 1954. This was Neptune of Upend. And in 1965, a bull terrier won the Thomas McQueen Memorial Trophy in Johannesburg. Now, because it's important, I want to recap quickly on the genetics. Again, referring to the Parker 27 article, this study was the largest, most widely cited study mapping 161 dog breeds by single nucleotide polymorphism data. And it identifies breed clades, or groups of genetically related dogs. In this study, the Ridgeback, or the Rhodesian Ridgeback, clusters within the Sighthound and Asian group, but is distinct from pure Sighthounds. And it has measurable European breed input, consistent with historical crosses. The Bull Terrier and Staffordshire Bull Terrier are part of the Bull and Terrier or Terrier type cluster, itself derived largely from Bulldog ancestry, with Terrier admixture. The Ridgeback's position on the chart lies between Sighthound and European Mastiff and Terrier lines, indicating historical hybridization. So, on Parker's phylogeny, the Ridgeback and Bull Terrier are not immediate cousins, but they share distant common ancestry through the European Bulldog and Terrier lineages that were historically crossed into early colonial dogs. Precisely what our interpretation suggests. In other words, yes, it's genetically plausible that an ancestral Bull Terrier type contributed to the Ridgeback's 19th century formation in southern Africa. Nevertheless, the oral data fills in for where the DNA is deficient and steps in to provide actual details of instances when the Bull Terrier was not only valued as a working dog in southern Africa, but was actually included in the Rhodesian Ridgeback bloodline. Now, Shannon et al. 2015 study shows or places breed dogs, including Ridgebacks, relative to village dogs and ancient lineages. Here, Ridgebacks again appear genetically distinct, but show partial European admixture. Bull Terrier was one of the earliest comparison breeds on the data set. In Shannon's data, the Ridgeback genome shows a dual signature, African village dog influence plus European working dog introgression. Bull Terrier ancestry is one possible route for that European component. In Parker et al. 2017 study, the link between the Rhodesian Ridgeback and the Bull Terrier does not indicate direct ancestry or a historical crossbreeding event. Instead, it represents genetic similarity or shared clustering in the multidimensional genetic space derived from the genome-wide SNP data. But oral data and ethnographic social observation testifies and suggests otherwise. So here's the key distinction. The lines in the diagram connect genetically similar breeds, not necessarily breeds that directly contributed to one another. The Ridgeback's cluster sits near the Bull Terrier and related breeds, such as the Staffordshire, because they share some ancestral European Mastiff type and Terrier type signatures, not because modern or colonial breeders deliberately crossed Bull Terriers into Ridgebacks. The Ridgeback's true primary roots are African, Khoi, Stone Age dogs, and European dogs, mostly Boer and Great Dane Mastiff type imports. So the diagram shows proximity, not proof of a cross. It tells us that the breeds are genetically closer than random, likely due to shared Old English stock, but not that the Bull Terrier itself was necessarily a direct progenitor. The Rhodesian Ridgeback on the cover of the book on which this podcast is based is Peaches, or Tambuku, just Peachy. She's now almost 14 years of age. She's 13 and a half. I bred her. When she was born, well, she's a liver-nose, ridgeless Ridgeback, but she's been an incredible dog. She has the strongest mind possible. When she was born, she had aspirated in the cesarean section, and she had developed pneumonia, and she couldn't suckle, and I had to milk her mother, Calypso, and feed Peaches, and I also had to inject her for about a week with an antibiotic, and Peaches was incredibly ill. She couldn't breathe. She was very weak, and she was obviously really in distress because she would cry a lot. But she pulled through, and she's been the most incredible dog. So she's actually needing quite a lot of care now, and she needs more veterinary support and care than she's had before. She's developed cancer, and I've been giving her natural medications. I've opted not to do chemo or anything like that with her because she is so old. I don't think it would do her much good, actually. But maybe I'll think about it. But at the moment, she's on herbal medications. So if you look, these podcasts do take a long time to make. I really love doing them, but they do take up a lot of time. And if you have enjoyed this one and you found it useful and informative, if you would care to contribute towards Peach's treatments, it would be very gratefully received. I do have a PayPal account, and I will leave my, you will find my email address on my channel page, and you can write to me if you would like to make a contribution, and I will give you my PayPal account. So until next time, enjoy your beautiful dogs, and God bless.
Voda. Oh, Terrier.